I've been asked to share a story with you tonight. It's about a man I like to call Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was a really nice guy. He had a loving nature, was good-hearted, good-humored, considerate, and kind. He was reliable, well thought of by everyone who knew him, his neighbors, family, and co-workers. Everybody liked Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was married to a lovely Christian lady and had a sweet Christian daughter named Anne. Mrs. Smith and Anne loved Mr. Smith with all their heart. He was a wonderful husband and father. He showered them with love and worked hard to provide them with a good life. Now I tell you all this to get you to see what kind of man Mr. Smith was. Maybe you are lucky enough to have a neighbor or a family member that reminds you of my Mr. Smith. But with all Mr. Smith had, and all he and his family shared, there was one thing Mr. Smith did not share with them, and that was their deep belief and faith in God. And even though Mrs. Smith and Anne prayed every day, day after day, years had gone by, and Mr. Smith had not changed his mind about this invisible man they called Jesus. I mean, he just didn't get this business of God wanting to come to earth and save people, and the very idea of Jesus being a God and turning into a baby and being born in a stable, well, it was a nice little story if his girls needed that to believe and to make their lives happier. Then it was fine with him. He never grumbled or interfered with any of their churchy stuff. So, as another Christmas Eve comes around, Mr. Smith finds himself at home alone, as usual, while his wife and daughter are at the church Christmas Eve service. He sits in his chair by the window playing a game of solitaire on his laptop when he realizes the wind has picked up. Looking out his window, he sees that not only is it really blowing, but also the predicted snowfall was coming in early. Now, one of Mr. Smith's enjoyments was his birds. He had several feeders right outside that window where he could watch the action, and he had filled them all up when they predicted snow. Now, he stood at the window a few minutes and realized the wind direction was right on the feeders, and they were just blowing back and forth like crazy. Between them and the wind, the birds couldn't get anything to eat. It hadn't done any good for him to put out food if they couldn't get it. As he watches, he begins to wonder if there isn't some way he can help. Maybe if he breaks off some pine boughs or myrtle bushes and puts them on the windy side, it will protect the feeders and the birds can eat. So pulling on his coat and hat and gloves, out he goes in the cold and tries to help his birds. Well, it took a few minutes before Mr. Smith comes back in, shaking the snow off and shivering. He felt sure he had solved the birds' problems. When he got back to the window, the wind had blown a piece of pine across the feeder, and now the birds seemed to be scared of it. So he puts his coat back on, and out he goes to try and fix it. Well, he quickly moved the pine needles where they wouldn't be in the way, and turned around to go back in. But man, it was getting colder and colder, and he hadn't worn his hat or his gloves, so he hurried too much. And losing his footing, he fell in the snow, knocking the wind out of himself. His knee was hurting, and it was a struggle to get on his feet. Finally, making it back to the house, he looked out the window, and there was only one lone bird at that feeder. Mr. Smith is thinking to himself, I can't believe I did all that for one stupid bird. I leave my nice warm house, I go out in the cold dark night, try to help a bunch of birds. Was that dumb or what? That fall really hurt. And it could have been worse. No one home, probably everyone, and a neighborhood going to the Christmas program. Excuse me, if I couldn't have gotten up, why, I might have even have died out there. Man, he thought, sitting down in his chair, that would have been something. Leave my nice warm chair, go out in the cold, and die. Trying to save a bunch of birds who didn't even want my help to start with. As he is thinking these thoughts, he begins to really think about what is happening. And he began to listen to his jumbled thoughts. Suddenly he began to understand. God has just shown him what Christmas is all about. Jesus left his home in heaven and came to a cold, uncaring earth, and he did die to save people. Even people like him who didn't want to be saved. The realization flooded his soul, and tears were flowing down his cheeks as he once again put on his coat and his hat and gloves and carefully headed out the door. A few minutes later, about middle way of the Christmas program, a cold burst of air came into church as the door opened and Mr. Smith came in. Limping on his sore knee, with snow dripping, tears falling, he walked straight up that aisle to the altar. Mr. Smith finally met that man called Jesus. And Christmas would never be the same again.
He was a loving father, a gentle master of his own, but all alone against the wrath of God, no Savior of his own, unmoved and softly cynical of those he thought naive. God come to earth, a virgin birth, how could anybody believe? His Christmas evening summertime, beside the fire was blue. At the window, tiny sparrow, in the spell of chilling snow, and moved with deep compassion, the redeeming plan he wrote. He tried in vain to gather them to a shelter from the killing of cold. Oh, what simple creature seldom comprehend the ways of man. Sometimes love expressed is met with doubts and fear. Thought if I could only fly among you, I could make you understand just for a moment.